Well, good evening and welcome to this Story Bearer session. This is our 6th week and we're really glad that you've joined us this evening. Do stick with us over the next 30 minutes or so as we journey together, looking at how in this ongoing season of lockdown and coronavirus, we can really look as Jesus followers to connect our stories with God's great story and into the lives of our friends. So I don't know about you, but good evening to you, Sean. It's nice to have you back.
Rachel. It's great to be back. Thanks. Yes, my name is Shan, as Rachel said, and each week we really have a heart to use these sessions to encourage one another to share our faith with our friends and family, particularly in this season of coronavirus, actually, and to resource you with the tools to do it. So lockdown has presented a lot of new opportunities for many of us to have conversations with neighbours, friends, family. So whether you're a really confident evangelist or just new to all this, we hope that we'll be able to equip you to share your faith with other people. We hope that you're engaging with this brilliant book that Phil has written, Story Bearer. You can do that obviously through the printed version, or you can check out our resources on storybearer.com, the Great Commission Facebook, or on the Evangelical Alliance website at eauk.org.
Brilliant. So I don't know how your day's been, but wherever you're joining us from, do put a comment in the comment box. We'd love to hear where you're from, how you're finding these Story Bearer sessions. I don't know about you, Sean, but my day has ended with a household of boys. Here I've got 2 sons, all very excited. Their main story of the day is that they were very much looking forward to the restart of the Premier League. So,
brilliant.
Arsenal fans, they're gearing up for this evening's activity. But I'm sure for you at home and for you, Sean, and for myself, our world is full of stories, isn't it? You only have to get onto Zoom or leave your front gate, and hopefully we engage with other people and just share the stories of life. And for those of you who were with us for week 5 last week, we had the very brilliant Des Johnson, director of Alpha in Scotland, sharing with us part of his story and his life as an ex-bouncer, now seeing and facilitating Alpha courses all over Scotland and now online and so on. But Sean, he was sharing some brilliant stories with us, wasn't he, about how we really do that kind of life on life journeying with people, how we listen with intention, not just waiting to speak and so on. So last week we were talking about the listening to people's stories. This week we're really delighted to have Peter Lynas and Joe Frost with us in just a few moments from Evangelical Alliance, same as Sean and I, colleagues of ours. And today we're going to be looking at listening not just to people's stories, but listening to culture. And the fact that actually, whilst we engage with other people, when we listen to culture, we learn to, or we attempt to understand the times that we're in, so that by doing that, we can actually better connect God's big story into other people's lives, but also within the cultural relevant context that we're in. Even in saying that, however, we do recognise that actually our cultures look so different, don't they, depending on where we live. And tonight we're really thrilled to have myself and Joe, who are from England, Peter, who's in Northern Ireland, and Sean, you're from Wales. So the culture around each of us in our individual lives and the bigger picture looks very different, even between the 4 of us this evening. We're also looking at kingdom culture, what it is to invade the places and the spaces that we're in with a sense of God's heart for the people that we live amongst. So, Sean, with both of those in mind, listening to people last week, listening to culture this week, can you say something of the call to action last week was to look at investing in those conversations with people? Did you have an opportunity to go deeper in conversation? And in line with saying about Des being our guest last week, what was maybe one highlight or something that you can recall from that conversation?
Well, yeah, I did have a chance actually to go deeper with some neighbours. So very simple, very practical story, really. I was out cutting the hedge at the front of the garden here on Sunday in the sunshine, and just got chatting to some neighbours, and they very, very helpfully offered to take bags and bags of hedge cuttings away to their allotment. And, you know, it just really blessed me. So when I came inside, I decided that I would just organise a little brownie delivery to their house to say thanks for being great neighbours. But then later on that evening, I realised that that was quite a remote way of doing life. So I redirected the brownie order to some other friends. Sadly, they didn't come to me. But it gave me the opportunity then to go and personally deliver a gift of thanks and just to have a better, more in-depth, more personal conversation. So it wasn't rocket science, really. It was just being intentional about creating space for conversations. But in terms of what Des shared, golly, he shared such gold. And I think the thing that really impressed on me again was the need to pray. And, you know, he was talking about having seen almost 300 people becoming followers of Jesus Christ. And it just really challenged me. I've got to up my game when it comes to my prayer list and my prayer life. So, yeah, that was a real nugget of gold from last week.
Yeah, really inspiring, wasn't he? And just to, as he shared stories of changed lives, like you said, that intentionality of our conversations and our relationships was really there, wasn't it? So, yeah, brilliant. Well, Sian, why don't we introduce our guests for this evening? As we navigate these coronavirus times, I'm sure so much has changed for every single one of us, from 12, 13 weeks ago through to being here today. But as we try and navigate and discern the times that we're in, and we're really thrilled this evening to welcome our wonderful colleagues from EA, Jo Frost, who's Director of Communications and Membership. Here she is. Here's Jo. And Peter Lynas, who's our UK Director. So welcome to you guys. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having us.
Yes, doing really well. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Brilliant. Nice to see you both. So as I said earlier, we've got a broad remit between us. We're in different parts of the UK. So that gives quite a good flavour, certainly from what our experiences are and have been of kind of what's been going on during these recent times. So my question to both of you as our guests, but also I'm going to ask Sian because she's in a different country in Wales. What would you say has been your experience so far of the changing cultures that you've been in amongst? What have you seen happening, and how has it changed both practically and culturally for you over the last 3 months or so? What would you say? Jo, let me come to you first.
Oh, easy question to kick off with. Thanks so much, Rachel. I think because I live in London, I'm in southwest London, work in London, spent most of my adult life here. We don't really live in neighbourhoods. You spend most of your life getting on a tube or getting on a train and going somewhere else. You commute for at least an hour a day. You never see your neighbours unless it's at the bus stop. And it's really fractured. But with lockdown, we have noticed that we've got neighbours and that we can talk to each other. And actually, it's really lovely. It was my birthday in lockdown and we were out in our garden and our neighbour was watering his plants. And then the next neighbour, who I'm friends with on Facebook, said happy birthday to me. And so then my neighbour went back into his house and starts playing on the piano and serenaded me happy birthday.
Oh.
Never have happened. London is the city of castles and drawbridges, and we live such segmented lives. For the first time, it feels like I'm rooted in a community and I know my neighbours and I'll chat to them and I'll find out how they're doing and how much they're being affected by what is happening. I can pray for my neighbours because I know them by name and by sight, and that has been a real cultural shift. I think, at least for me in my city, that has felt very different.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a great example. Thanks, Jo. And I'm sure loads of people the nation over will see that in different regards in different places. But yeah, what a blessing to have come out a really challenging time. Peter, how about you over in Northern Ireland? Tell us a bit of what's changed, what you're seeing, what you've been encouraged by.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes is definitely we have been less impacted as a country and as a nation by it. Just there are less people with COVID and less deaths. And that's partly just geography. We're a little bit further away, a little less connected then to some of the sources. So that has definitely had an impact. I mean, the biggest personal impact for me is having the kids at home, not being at school. And that's been massive, just the chance both to sow into them and the challenges, just to be really honest around that as well. And I think no travel has been huge. So for myself, but for many people who live here but will travel quite a bit. So I live right in the north coast of Northern Ireland near the Giant's Causeway, small town, lovely, wonderful, as long as you get out from time to time. And not being able to travel, I found that very challenging, and I know lots of other folks. But then I've been able to meet them. So we go out for a walk a lot. You're out, you meet a lot of people who wouldn't normally be in the town because they're often commuting and on the move. And so that's been great to have those conversations. And the final thing I'd say is just the real contested nature. I think Joe mentioned fractured. There's still that sense of some people thinking everything's okay, some people thinking it's the worst moment in the world. And as we come out in particular of lockdown, as we move into this more fluid space, there's definitely a real sense that it's contested as to who's right, who's wrong, what we can and can't do. And I guess the challenge for me personally is to move from that contesting to contending. What does it mean to lean in this moment into the supernatural, into the spiritual, rather than getting caught online and in the social media space where I'm quite keen as a former lawyer to contest and argue with everybody, and actually realizing that's not always going to be the healthiest way to engage.
Amazing. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, really helpful reflections. And Sean, what would you say, again, being over in Wales and in Cardiff?
It's just hilarious, really, because it's kind of the flip of what both Joe and Peter were saying. So we are highly relational people anyway. We'll chat to whoever at the bus stop, on the street, neighbours. So we feel really connected, but we're very much still in lockdown, and we haven't hit the first part of our traffic light system just yet. So we're still in lockdown. So I guess we're feeling quite restricted in terms of friendships and relationships, and not being able to get outside the city is very strange, because a lot of my friends would live sort of on the outskirts here of Cardiff or in other parts of Wales. So I think the challenge really has been to stay connected, whether that's over the phone, which sounds so old-fashioned, or by Zoom or any of these sort of online formats. We feel quite restricted at the moment.
Yeah, wow. It shows, isn't it, really fascinating hearing about the different pictures across the UK. And like you said, Sean, actually we talk about this easing in lockdown, but actually, as you said, in Wales, that's not quite the case yet. So, it shows, isn't it, I guess all of what we have been going through, what we are going through, has the opportunity to change or to shift culture, whether that's in the short or the long term. In the Storybearer book, we're looking particularly at chapter 9 this week, which is about reading the signs of the times. And in there's a quote that says that culture could be defined as, quite simply, the way we do things around here. And people might be familiar with that phrase, whether it's in a school context, whether it's in a family, the way we do things, whether it's in a workplace or even in a church. But Joe, Peter, tell us, when we even start thinking about how we listen to culture, which is obviously the theme of the evening, help us to understand that a little bit more. What does that actually mean in the context of how we do things around here? Peter, let me come to you first.
Yeah, listen, we could probably spend all night defining culture, debating what it means. I found something that Mark Sayers said quite helpful, 3 strands or pieces to culture. There's one strand or root in cultus. You might have the idea of the cult, what you worship. David Foster Wallace, the American writer, said, everybody worships. The only choice is who or what to worship. And the reality is we are worshipping beings. Another thinker, philosopher, theologian, Yemi Smith, said the same, you are what you love. So we're wired to worship and go after things. The second is about you're enculturated into something. You inhabit a story. You go and live in a new culture and you learn about it and inhabit that. And likewise, we all live in various stories at this moment. And that's one of the keys to Storybearer, the kind of sometimes story clashes that we experience. And the third is the idea of cultivate, again, links with culture again. So what do we cultivate and develop within our own lives? What do we disciple ourselves into? What is it that we're encouraging to be developed? How do we change or cultivate a culture in a place in which we're working? And so I think those 3 strands can be helpful to think about. What do we worship? What's the story we inhabit? And what are we developing or growing in our lives? And then we just see the breadth and the scale of it. And then Joe will have wisdom as to how you change it.
Right. I think that's probably been the most interesting thing about what's just happened to us, not just as a country, but also as a culture and around the world, in so much as the stories that we occupied and gave us understanding and helped us navigate life have been proven to be really poor at handling what's just happened to us. We live in a culture that says, be successful, do whatever makes you happy, live life to the full, to the max, go out and enjoy yourself. And then we hit lockdown and realized that it isn't about me being happy. It's about my friendships. It's about my family. It's about relating to other people. What do you mean I can't hold somebody's hand? When we were starting to go into lockdown, and you realized that you couldn't hug or high five or touch anybody, and the awkwardness of the elbow bump. And I went to the pub and I watched every single person walk into that pub, elbow bump the person that they were saying hello to, and then go for a hug. Because we literally couldn't have that moment of connection. It was too important. And we've realized what's important. We've realized who the essential workers are of our community, and they weren't who we thought they were. We've realized what's important. There are calls at the moment going on for justice, for leveling the playing field, for paying for past mistakes and making up for wrongs. The narrative that we used to occupy with our culture has been proven wanting, and it's left us asking really deep and interesting questions, which is again why we're seeing really interesting stats about who's attending church, who's praying, who's asking questions, who's seeking out alpha. All of these things are coming because our culture isn't capable of giving us a narrative to navigate what we're experiencing, because the cultural story is always going to be too small. We've always got to look for a gospel story that is capable of holding the complexity of suffering and of joy, of beauty and of sorrow, of justice and of mercy. And our culture can't do that at the moment.
If I could jump in, I think it's just a fascinating time then to be engaging in culture, which we all are doing. So it's not, cultural conversations are not something that Joe and I have or some special group of people have. We are all doing cultural conversations. And the culture said, look, the individual rules, the individual is the most important thing. I do what I want. I'm in charge. And then the story shifted and said, no, stay at home and save lives. We all do things now. We sacrifice our freedom on behalf of the other, and particularly the most vulnerable. So we suddenly just got rid of the individual story. And that individual story also said, look, it's all about me and my own. And actually, we hate being on our own. We don't like isolation. We desire the relationships. We need to go in the pub and we need to hug people. And then we had this overwhelming kind of death count every single day on the papers and in the news. And every filter was about how many people were dying, and the crisis and the fear and the angst. And we're not wired to cope with that, because we're supposed to be the scientific, rational people where we're just a collection of cells. Everything's fine. It's like, no, we're not. We can't cope with that overwhelming kind of story. And so the secular story, if you want to put that language on it, was really thin and didn't cope well. The individual story didn't cope well. The kind of global, we're citizens of the world, didn't work. Suddenly we're now all local. We don't travel. We're connecting. And so suddenly you're saying, okay, there's a story jarring, clashing going on. Yeah. And then we as Christians fail if we have a really narrow story that says, hey, Jesus came and died and wants to save your soul and get you to heaven. If that's the story we're telling, we're dead in the water, and we have been for a while. But if we're in a larger story that says every single person has dignity and value, that challenges what's going on at this moment as to who's valuable in our story and who gets into hospital. And it challenges the story of what's going on in terms of race and ethnicity in our culture. And if we have a story that's filled with hope rather than the fear and the angst, suddenly it's a much different. So rather than always being on the back foot, it feels like at this moment, it's a really interesting time to be engaging with people about where the story largely of our culture is leading, and some differences that we want to bring into play.
Brilliant. So to keep on that sort of metaphor of the water then, I mean, somebody once said in terms of culture that we need to be aware of the sea that we're swimming in. So what do you think have been the cultural phenomena of this season? I mean, obviously we've had the clap for carers every Thursday night, but do you think there have been other phenomena as well? And if so, have you been able to interact with those phenomena in terms of being able to then go on and share your stories of faith with other people or engage with them in a deeper way? I'll direct that to Joe. Why not? Sorry, Peter.
Yay. I'm thinking about this, and I couldn't think of anything other than the clap. And actually, now I've got one. Yay! I think we've experienced collective emotions quite interestingly. way back when Princess Diana died, we experienced for the first time in my lifetime, sort of a collective grief, a moment of mourning, which probably had very little to do with Princess Diana's actual death. But there was this moment, this cathartic moment, where anyone who had experienced loss or tragedy and grief found a moment to do that together.
Right.
And I think in lockdown, we've seen similar outpourings of emotion, but they've been different. You had the rage over Dominic Cummings.
Right.
And just how angry people got at the injustice of them not being able to see their loved ones, them not being able to care for their parents or people who are sick, and they sacrificed to do the right thing, and then saw somebody in their eyes who didn't. And this rage moment. And then we've got a similar rage moment happening now with the Black Lives Matter movement and the justice protests that are flaring up. And now the counter protests that are flaring. There's this feeling of injustice. There's this feeling of collective emotional response. And there are certain cultural hooks that we can pin things on and say, you're the reason why I'm angry, or you're the person who's caused this injustice that I'm experiencing. And I think that's a real challenge for us to navigate that story wisely, because needs to be recognition, there needs to be empathy, there needs to be solidarity, there needs to be justice. But equally, if all people are created with dignity and honor in the image of God, then we cannot throw villains under the bus, and we can't use people as scapegoats. We can't say the gospel isn't for the white working class man any more or any less than he is for the black millennial. We have to remember that all people need to know who Jesus is, and we need to make sure that our story is capable of being told and heard to all people who need to know the truth in that matter.
Thanks, Jo. What about you, Peter? Any thoughts to add?
Well, I think we can move to more meaningful conversations quicker. I just think there's a receptiveness. People are up for more engaged conversations, is my experience. So we're either talking about what's going on in terms of hospitals and deaths. We're talking about values and ethics and who gets treated. We're talking about what it means to be furloughed and the potential of redundancies and coming back. We're talking about the mental health of people. So people are a lot more open about just the pressures of being in lockdown, the stresses that puts on relationships, and just the difficulties that can have. And so certainly, as I've walked the kind of local paths at night and been out and about, people are much more, I think, up for those conversations. And in that moment, then I think there's a chance to bridge build. We've got some shared experiences, as Jo was saying. And then we have also seen that very contested, fractured part, be it Dominic Cummings, as Jo was saying, J.K. Rowling, the race, just so many of those conversations. So navigating those with nuance and with grace can also provide, I think, a real window. And I think we've also seen that economics and politics is almost irrelevant in one sense. The space for lament and grief, what does that look like? So again, it depends on who we're talking to. For some, this is very real. They've lost loved ones. And this is a really difficult moment. For others, they're just finding it really frustrating and kind of discombobulating. I couldn't resist using that word at that moment. Like, they're just not sure what's going on. And then what's truth? That question remains. So many lenses in at this moment into a conversation. So I think for me, that's probably the big takeaway, is you can get to a meaningful moment in a conversation, it feels like in seconds, what would probably previously have taken maybe days or weeks to move through to.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, thanks, Peter. So back to Phil's book, Storybearer, obviously. He has sort of three main threads inside the book, which is talking about God's story, talking about our story, and then leading into our friend's story. And he speaks too of culture as being the important fourth story, in that we need to listen to it when we're sharing our faith. But why, guys, does what's going on in culture and in the world around us affect our methods so much? And I'm going to back to Peter, I think.
Because culture is, as you said earlier, the water that we breathe in. Two fish are swimming along and the older fish comes past and he said, "Hey guys, how's the water?" And one fish turns to the other and says, "What the hell's water?" And it's a famous story. It's just that we're so in the culture, we sometimes completely miss it. But a moment like this kind of throws it into stark relief. And suddenly we go, oh, this is what's going on around us. I hadn't even realized these are the stories I'm swimming amongst. So that's why I think there's this moment where not just us, everybody goes, oh, that's the story we're all in. Gosh, that's a bit messed up. As we get encouraged to go back to the shops and the PM saying, go out and spend what you can, you're going, really, we want to go back to that consumer story? They're like, let's open the shops on Sunday. And you're like, really, we want to put the hardest pressed workers, the new front line that we just cheered, we want them all to have to work on Sundays so they don't see their kids and we get to shop when we want? Is that really the story we want to return to? So I think so much of it just takes us into that space. And I guess the reason we have such synergy with Phil, we've been looking at this in our Being Human podcast, Joe and I, we think the fundamental biblical story, the God story, makes so much sense. And this moment, I think, again, that brings it into stark relief and said, absolutely, let's build bridges to people and say, God created the world. It was good. It was good. It was good. Let's not start the conversation with what's wrong in the world, which so often we do. Oh, here's the sin point. Here's the point of my first engagement with you is to say what you're doing wrong. And then, hey, my simple solution is just invite Jesus into your life. Then twiddle your thumbs, and when you die, you'll get to heaven. It's like, that's not the Bible. So this is a moment to really readjust for us and our friends, open up that conversation in a different way.
Very good. And Joe, briefly from you?
Yeah, I think that point about the water that we're swimming in and what on earth is water is really the point. And I think culture shifts so fast that actually when you stop and you talk about what is being debated in Parliament, or when you've got a general election and you look at the manifesto and you think, this didn't exist as a concept 20 years ago, and now it's the fundamental way I live my life right now. How did that come about so fast? Things are moving faster now than they have ever have done, and we've all got whiplash. But we don't notice it because the way our cultural narratives are told, you absorb things so quickly and so uncritically that you don't really notice what's happening around. Or you're always told to mistrust voices. And I think that's the other challenge that we have, is that things move so fast, but you're also told not to trust anybody. There was some stats coming out this week about which media outlets are most trusted at the moment. And what's really interesting is that some are really trusted and the same network is really mistrusted, and others haven't ever heard of it. And that's true for the BBC, that's true for Sky, that's true for ITV, that's true for Channel 4, that's true for The Guardian, it's true for The Times, across the board. We don't know who to trust. We don't know which voices to listen to. And therefore, we don't know which questions to ask. We don't know what seems right. It feels like we are living in a world of judges and the people did what they thought was right. And it feels like we're living in a world of Ephesians 4, where we just get tossed by the waves of current thinking. And in both of those situations, rooting yourself to submitting yourself to the King, but understanding his kingdom and his mindset and his culture gives you so much greater foundation to navigate all of these conversations, to navigate what shifts and changes, so that we don't do it uncritically, but we do it with our eyes wide open. And that's transformative, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. And the same, so the overall trust in media is way down. And so the theory was that one big story, well, that's old news. Nobody's interested in that. So instead we have loads of stories. So we go on Twitter and Facebook and we just get bombarded and we just get overwhelmed. And we're actually now in head melt. And we're like, please just give me back the one simple story. That was a much easier way. And so without oversimplifying, in part, that is what we're saying, actually, there has to be a single story to understanding. Otherwise, we just go on social media. And I was doing it today and just going, this is just head melt. This is 52 different angles on the one piece of information. How can this be? We can't cope. And so we are freaking out as a nation. And so we don't trust mainstream media. We go to multiple sources, and that just isn't healthy. And so the big challenge is, okay, so is there a hopeful story that actually begins to join some dots together, that lives with our real experience that we've had, as well as the larger issues that are wrestling in this world? And I'm now much happier than I ever was, probably say, absolutely, and the God story makes total sense to me. It doesn't answer everything. It's not an oversimplification. But I'm now on the front foot in conversations where I felt on the back foot even 5 years ago.
Brilliant. So helpful. And also at the same time flags up so many complexities, doesn't it, of the culture that we're living in. I know for me, one of the most fascinating things of navigating these times has been through my work, through my friendships, has been sort of almost that ear to people and listening to what they're saying, what's going on, but also that discerning ear to be listening and trying to stay attuned to God and be saying, what's going on here? How should we navigate these times? And what does the future look like? Joe, Peter, just as we finish in just a moment, looking at obviously the whole of Storybearers, as you know, our aim and our hope is, as we journey through this together and with the people watching at home, is to give greater confidence to people to connect God's story with their friends, to share their stories of faith. If you had to, in light of this whole story of culture, all that we've been talking about, give a couple of top tips of advice as to how to navigate culture, but to bring in our stories of faith when speaking to friends or those around us, what would be, from your experience, some top tips that you'd love to impart to others this evening? Joe, let me come to you first.
I think certainly to start with, it was the non-anxious presence. I think so many of my friends, of the mums at the school gate, trying to navigate how to do lockdown well, how to stay safe, how to keep your kids safe. Then again, in my world, going back to school, should we send our kids back? Should we keep them home? What's the right thing to do? Feeling like those in authority were just playing emotional ping pong with our kids as to who was making the right call and who was ruining their lives. Actually, to be the person to say, you're going to be okay, that I am praying for you, you will make the right decision, listen to your conscience, God is for you, God is for your family. The UK blessing just, was one of those moments to turn around and say, you may feel lost right now, but you are not lost to the King of Kings. And what it means to pray over my neighborhood. We produce this prayer and walk little resource, and I've been using it just to pray over my neighbors, to walk around when I'm doing the scoot with my kids, to say, Lord, give them peace, let your presence rest on them, when they're asking questions, when in their dark moments, Lord, would something happen to break through, to let them know that they are not alone, that they are loved, that you are for them, that you are with them, that there is healing, that there is peace available. Having those words of hope, of peace, and of assurance have been really powerful, at least where I am.
Amazing. Thanks, Joe. And Peter?
Yeah, I would say, look, read or listen, depending on how you get your sources of information. We've got to read the biblical text. Let's stop kidding ourselves. You can do life on your own as a Christian or without reading the Bible. But listen to somebody like Mark Sayers and John Mark Comer, This Cultural Moment, John Tyson, one of the best preachers out in New York. Like, get good sources of stuff coming into you. Secondly, contend. And I say that because pray is what I really mean, but like, pray earnestly, just lean in for a space. Let's contend and go after communities and streets and spaces that we're in and workplaces, and let's really get on our knees and wrestle and say, God, I want to see change in this place, and how can I be a part of it? And then be hopeful. I'm really struck by this guy, Professor Carol Sikora, I think it is, this prof who tweets really kind of optimistically and hopefully, not naively, not blind, on coronavirus and stuff around it, and just the kind of following he's built. We've got to have a hopeful voice in this moment. I think it builds from Joe's non-anxious presence. We're both agreed on that. And part of what we bring has to be a hopeful narrative. We live in a story that is hopeful, that is transformative, that comes from death into life, that comes from chaos into order, that comes from emptiness into the fullness and abundance of God. And so we've got to live into hope at this moment. And that will be the antidote to a culture that is currently driven by fear and angst and panic.
Yeah.
Well, Joe and Peter, thank you so much. I could certainly listen to you all evening, but I'm not going to keep you that long. But thanks just for bringing us such wisdom in this season. And we're so grateful for what you've shared with us this evening. It's been absolutely brilliant. Could you just do a plug for the Being Human podcast that you've done, just so we absolutely are clear as to where we can find that, please? Peter, do you want to plug that?
So Joe and I have this podcast, Being Human. We think that's the most fundamental question, like, is it what it is to be a human being in our world today? It's the most contested issue. It goes right to the heart of what it is to be made in the image of God. It's a great bridge build. It's what we share with everyone else. We are all created in the image of God. And we want to wrestle with that, then what it is to be called to follow Jesus, and what it is to be commissioned and sent out into this world. It's where we wrestle with big issues around identity, relationships, purpose. In the last season, we took up Facebook, China, AI, artificial intelligence, you name it. We thought, how do all these stories integrate with this core moment? And we're really excited. So you can find out about that if you just search Being Human in your normal podcast supplier. There's links down below for where you'll see it. And we've loved chatting about it. And we're back doing some stuff here now in lockdown. So yeah, Being Human, come and follow us.
Amazing. And the episodes are absolutely stunning. So thank you both so much. We're going to say goodnight to you now. But just as Joe and Peter disappear from our screens, if you're a regular listener to these Story Bearer sessions, you'll know that we always end with a call to action. So this week, our task is to find really natural ways in our conversations about the times, the cultures, values, etc., to connect God's story to the lives of our friends and show that even in 2020 that God is relevant and a relationship with him can be real, that he has something to say and that he brings hope, that hope that we were just hearing about just now, and he brings peace in the midst of changing times. So that's our little call to action as we leave. But before we close, we've plugged the Being Human podcast, but I would just love to end this evening by inviting you to become an individual member of the Evangelical Alliance. Now is a better time than ever to add your voice to the growing number of people who are uniting to say, yeah, I want to make Jesus known across this nation. We are the longest running unity ministry in the UK, and how many of us know that where there is unity, God commands a blessing. It's just £3 a month to sign up as an individual, and it's still £3 a month if you want to join as a couple. And that £3 will help us to resource your life. It'll also help us to be able to represent you in the corridors of power across the United Kingdom, whether that's at the Senedd, Stormont, Holyrood, Westminster. So can I just invite you straight after this finishes, not to log off, but to head straight to eauk.org/join us and sign up for individual membership there. I'm going to say it one more time because I kind of stumbled over it, but it's eauk.org/join us. And if you sort of pinpoint that you've been listening to the Story Bearer sessions, we will send you a copy of Phil Knox's brilliant book, Story Bearer.
Amazing. So all that remains to say is, once again, thank you so much for joining us. We really hope that as you've engaged with us and with Peter and with Joe, that something of what we've shared has been interesting and encouraging. Our hope is, of course, that we just journey this together, being people who gain greater confidence in being able to connect God's amazing story in this season of coronavirus times with those around us that we know and love and connect with. So do join us next week. Next week, we're looking at the subject of powerful prayer through evangelism. We've talked a little bit about prayer. Next week, we have the wonderful Yemi Adedeji with us, powerhouse of prayer, and also Marie Aitken, who's director of Alpha across England and the UK. So don't miss that one. Do come and join us. We'll be here in the same time, the same place next Wednesday, 8 p.m. But until then, God bless. Have a great week. Thanks so much for joining us again. Bye for now.
Good night.